Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and we got an extra video today, actually, thanks to a amazing sponsor. Actually, this sponsor is one of the major reasons that I was inspired to get started doing this channel 7 years ago. So it's my pleasure and my honor to have them as a sponsor on this channel, and to help me keep the lights on in the place.
Hello kiddies, it's your Grandpa Guignol here, inviting you to listen to Gasp, the graphic audio story podcast. This week, we begin Rattus New Yorkus by Hunter Shea. What do you do when the rats of New York are exposed to a chemical that makes them extremely prolific and very aggressive? I'll give you a hint. You better run! www.graphicaudio.net or wherever fine podcasts are found.
As a child, I grew up in a small southern Missouri town, just north of the Ozark mountain range. There are about 10,000 people living there, and, well, for the most part, they preferred to keep to themselves. It was a weird mentality that you never ran into often in the South. During the summer following my second year of elementary school, all that would change. In this town, there was only one provider for television. It was an old cable provider known as Ozark Cable, which served southern Missouri and northern Arkansas. It only broadcasted 10 channels, and given that satellite wasn't available within 100 miles of my town, I had to make the best of it. In fact, the only children's programming available was Tom and Jerry reruns, which broadcasted out of Little Rock on Saturday mornings. Needless to say, my options for cartoons weren't particularly extraordinary. At the beginning of summer vacation following second grade, my family received a notice from Ozark Cable, as did the other 10,000 residents in town. The statement noted that a new high-tech broadcasting station was to complete construction just north of town. In addition, my town would be receiving 30 new channels, including Nickelodeon. I was excited as any child my age would be. Hell, I would finally be able to watch new cartoons anytime during the week. During the third week of summer vacation, the broadcasting station went operational, and my small town finally entered the digital age. Static no longer interrupted regular programming, show lineups no longer switched without notice, and of course, I finally had Rocko's Modern Life. Overall, I was a pretty happy 7-year-old kid. And that's when it started. I heard it first from one of my friends. Apparently, his parents had been watching late-night entertainment around midnight or 1 in the morning, when sporadic interferences in the broadcast began to occur. Images of an eyeless man flashed on the screen for seconds at a time, accompanied by startlingly loud white noise. Apparently, it was loud enough to wake my friend up. Unsettled, his parents called the cable provider and notified them of the incident. They were subsequently told that it would be looked into. However, the problem persisted. Eventually, it became so frequent and widespread throughout the town that my parents actually prohibited me from watching any television between midnight and dawn. Not that I was interested in doing so anyway. Soon, no one watched any late-night television. There were rumors of television sporadically turning on and displaying this eyeless man, seemingly reaching out towards the viewer. But they were just rumors. One Thursday morning, while my dad was at work, my mom needed to run into town and pick up a prescription from a local pharmacy. Normally, I was forced to accompany her on her daily expeditions into town, but after begging to stay home to watch the new episode of Ren and Stimpy, she surrendered and left to run her errands. After sneaking a few cookies, I sat in front of the TV and waited for the episode to begin. The episode began as usual, with a catchy theme tune and glimpses into the antics of the characters. And then the screen went black. You can only imagine how enraged I was. I had been waiting all week for this new episode, only to have the channel go out. After parading around the TV room in a fit of childhood frustration, I sat in front of the television and I waited for the broadcast to resume. A brief spark of static appeared on the screen, and I sat in eager anticipation for the episode to continue. Images of decomposing and disemboweled bodies filled the screen, accompanied by ear-piercing screams that filled the house. I immediately ran out of the TV room, but not before looking back at the television. A man with bloodied holes for eyes seemed to approach the screen with his livid, decaying arms reaching out. I hid under the dining room table and began to sob hysterically. In my fit of nauseated terror, I vomited on the floor. When my mom came home, she seemed to jump back at the noise that consumed the house and immediately dropped her bags and pulled me out from under the table. I was hysterical and my face was pale with fear. Before I could answer my mother about what was going on, she entered the TV room. The screaming stopped. She unhooked the television. When I first told her what happened, we heard a knock on the door. It was my friend and his parents. He was sobbing and was hiding his face against his mother's shirt. They had experienced the same thing I had. Everyone in town did. Almost immediately, local law enforcement became involved due to the nature of the images. And after a week of no television and sleeping in my parents' bed, the local police department issued a statement. It wasn't as complete as we had wished. About 5 months before the original notice in regards to the new broadcasting center, Ozark Cable bought a piece of land that belonged to a long-abandoned sanatorium and accompanying on-site burial ground. In addition to demolishing the decrepit building, over 200 bodies were exhumed and cremated without warrant to make room for the miles of underground cables. Ozark Cable was immediately fined, and its owner was prosecuted. After 3 months of legal battles, the cable company eventually shut down, with satellite television taking its place soon after. The source of the images remains unknown. It is also unknown how the broadcasts even happened in the first place. It is said when you take a picture of someone, you capture their soul in the camera. It is also said that if you print it off, that picture contains the soul itself, and you can control them with it. I'm not sure where to start. Do you know what the primordial soup is? A veritable ocean of elements, all floating around randomly, all through millions of years of time, and eventually the right set of random circumstances comes to pass and the elements were able to connect together and form the world's first single-cell organism. Now, that's a really boiled down version of it, but I'm sure you get the gist of it. Fast forward a few billion years to the earliest 1990s, when the internet first began to rapidly accelerate. Every home had a computer, and new connections between computers were opening on a by-the-second basis. Trillions of bytes of data began to transfer around the world at the speed of light. Music, text, sound, and most importantly, pictures. Now, when you take a picture of someone and capture their soul, what happens when that picture is converted to data and placed in a hard drive? Does the soul follow? 15 years later, we believe so. We believe that when you take a picture of someone and upload it onto your computer, alongside the image data, a blueprint of that person's soul itself is imprinted on the file. Look at your pictures folder. How many souls reside in that folder alone? And that's just the beginning, though. These soul blueprints each retain pieces of a puzzle, parts of the soul itself. Recently, a group of hackers who refer to themselves as the Cardinals took an interest in this theory and began experiments. They found anomalies within the binary sequences of images based on similar features of the person that they had taken a picture of. A binary DNA. Now, these hackers had come to possess a set of 3 extremely important data files, one AVI, one JPEG, and one MP3, each of which possessing interesting, unexplainable qualities. The first, Cradle.avi, depicts what appears to be a group of teenagers with a low-quality video camera exploring the basement of a house. The quality of the video is distorted completely, beyond anything comprehensible, and the video is very low quality. For most of the video, the camera is passed around the group, handed back and forth, and jerked around too much to make anything noticeable. But near the end, the camera finds an odd angle, and you can semi-clearly make out a young girl standing in the corner facing the wall. Her hair is long and black, and she is wearing some sort of white dress. You only see her for a split second, but many people who have seen the video claim that there seems to be something wrong with her. A bit deformed, but not in a way that people can explain. The truly peculiar property of this video is what happens to the user's computer at the end of it. In the last second of the video, if not already so, the video will force full screen itself. Along with this, you are left with a 1-second looping clip of a window and a wall. It loops 15 times, and then the girl is seen again, standing on the other side of the window with her back to the viewer, slowly wavering back and forth. After a few moments, the video ends and the user's computer permanently shuts down. Inspection has shown that the entire registry becomes completely corrupt, requiring the user to totally wipe and reinstall. The second file is known as needles.mp3. This sound file, when played, plays for about 3 minutes. It is extremely distorted. One can occasionally make out some form of voice talking, but most of the sound is the form of growling, rolling, crackled roars. The user who listens to this file often experiences extreme nausea and a loss of balance for a brief period of time. The final file is known as burningman.jpg. The file name has nothing to do with what the actual picture depicts. Instead, it's just displayed as a haphazard mess of overlaid and meshed images of dolls in a hallway. There also seems to be an image of a man standing with his head cast down in the background. The image is too distorted to make anything out, much like the other files. The image, when downloaded and opened on a user's desktop, will proceed to stay permanently open on whatever program it is opened through. Not only that, the program becomes disabled. Nothing else happens. The image just permanently sits there, unclickable, unminimizable, and just left with a man's invisible gaze staring at you. From what the group of hackers was able to discern, this file seems to have been pre-compiled into the data something along the lines of CMDOW. Yet as complex and intricate as the program is, It appears to work across all OS platforms. No one knows who the original creator is. In fact, few people have heard of it, as the file is uncopyable nor sendable. This, in fact, further adds to the mystery, as often receivers of this file will obtain it from random anonymous emails posted in forums on a download link. Posing the question, how is that poster able to upload it? If you ever find any of these files, refrain from downloading any of them. They all have varying detrimental effects on your computer, from taking over your entire registry, corrupting your OS, or freezing your mouse and crashing your computer. Now onwards, this group of hackers, the Cardinals, took to analyzing these 3 files and comparing their odd behaviors. They had heard of other such odd files, images, and data, but were never able to get their hands on them, at least as far as we know, though rumors state they in fact were able to locate and collect all of the known files, like the original smile.jpg, the barbie.jpg, and even suicidemouse.avi. Nonetheless, all these files in hand, the group lined the files up and began to meticulously work through the binary, 1, 0, and 1 at a time, checking for similar strains and series of binary that matched. And they did manage to successfully do so, at least the legend says. The results were 7 identical executable files that did nothing. Simply a gibberish pile of zeros and ones. They endlessly puzzled over the files, each tackling an executable each. They decided to name them after themselves: lust, gluttony, greed, envy, sloth, wrath, and pride. And last, they attempted to line the files up, and remarkably, something odd happened. The copies of these files quite suddenly meshed together. The result was a single, complete executable, named Barely Breathing.exe. And not much else is known after that point. They didn't execute it. They analyzed the file in every way possible. Hex, binary conversions, anything to figure out what the odd file would do. To no avail. Even after forming together, it was even bigger of a jumble of ones and zeros and made even less sense than the separated executables. They backed the file up on a flash drive and proceeded to run it. It was the last program to be run on their destroyed computers a week later. Their corpses had been disfigured beyond recognition. Descriptions of the corpses stated that they almost seemed as if they had brutal slashes across their face and arms. Every square inch of skin had been bare and had been mutilated, almost microwaved and then sliced repeatedly by micro-thin razors. The entire event attempted to be covered up, but there was some media leakage, and because the Cardinals had been keeping a blog amongst themselves and a few close friends, that was closed down subsequently and deleted, it was quickly spread out as per what they had attempted to accomplish, and it was or was not related to their terrible deaths. And what of the flash drive? A friend who knew of its existence had later checked the home of the group and was unable to find it. According to reports, the drive was found in the pocket of one of the group and had been taken into custody. The trail continues on. The file resurfaces every few weeks around the globe. Officials attempt to cover it up. Media attempts to leak it out. But if you ever find a cryptic email with an attached labeled BarelyBreathing.exe, do not open it. I'm sure you heard of the Ronald McDonald House charity. They provide housing for families of sick kids when they're in the hospital. It seems pretty innocent, right? Well, there's another side of the charity. There's another type of Ronald McDonald House, one that not many people know about. There's one in most big cities. You won't find it by looking for it. It doesn't have an address, it doesn't have a sign above the door, it doesn't even have windows. No, the only way you'll find it is if you're taken there. That's how I found it. I've never met my real parents. I've been in and out of foster families and group homes here in Detroit since I was a kid. I'm 15 now, and I'm what they refer to as a bad kid. Always causing trouble, always getting thrown in and out of places with another unsuspecting do-gooder who thinks they can help me. I always prove them wrong. My caseworker sat across the black metal table, looking weary and frazzled. On the table between us was a thick, letter-sized brown envelope. My case file. "Well, your reputation has preceded you," she said, "and now you only have two options, military school in Lansing or the Ronald McDonald House, which has miraculously cleared you for acceptance." I don't have the patience for drill sergeants and 5 a.m. reverie. And how bad could a halfway house named after a fast food clown possibly be? Ronald McDonald House. It was. Dark clouds loomed above me the day I climbed into the back of my caseworker's town car. My few belongings in a backpack and the clothes on my back, it's all I could take. One of the few belongings I had was a photo album filled with pictures of all the foster families I had been with. It was nice to remember some of them, even though I was a royal fuck-up each time. I had a few cases who went through the Ronald McDonald House, the caseworker said from the front seat. Things went so well for those kids, I never had to transfer them anywhere else. In fact, the house took over their case file and everything. We drove into downtown Detroit, past all the familiar landmarks. I had been thrown out of one foster home just outside of town because I snuck into downtown Detroit with some neighbor kids to sneak into a dive bar. Good times. Well, here we are. The car came to a stop. I looked out the window. We had parked in front of a tall, gray, windowless building, sandwiched between two other industrial buildings on a narrow street. I noted there was an address on the building to my left, and one on the right. But none on this particular building. Not even a sign. "Are you sure?" I asked, hesitating as I opened the car door and climbing out of the back seat. I slung my backpack over my shoulder, clinging tightly to the strap, and followed the caseworker up to the windowless metal doors. She pressed a buzzer and spoke to someone inside, and the doors clicked to unlock. We walked in. As soon as the metal doors closed behind us, I noticed the pin drop silence. It was that sort of silence that was so oppressive and empty, almost deafens you. Across the dimly lit lobby, there was a glass window with someone inside, a secretary. She was turned away, typing something intently. We walked over to the window. The caseworker rang a bell on the counter, and the secretary spun around in her chair. Her face was painted like a clown, like Ronald McDonald, in fact. She even had the short, curly red hair. Otherwise, she wore a typical white nurse's dress. I wanted to laugh at how bizarre it was, but I couldn't. A chill swept down my spine. Something was not right. I watched as the nurse and my caseworker interacted. Paperwork was passed through the window. The caseworker slid my case file under the glass as the nurse slid her some papers to sign. As my caseworker signed the papers, the nurse looked at me. Her smile should have been warm and welcoming, but all I saw in her eyes was hunger. I can't stay here, I stammered loudly. Take me to the military school in Lansing, please. What's the matter, sweetie? The nurse asked, her voice muffled slightly by the glass. Afraid of clowns? I looked into her hungry eyes. Now there was a malicious glint as she laughed. My caseworker laughed too, obliviously, and said, Now, don't overreact. You'd hate the military school. Besides, this will be good for you. Yes, said the clown nurse. This will be good for you. Before I could object, I heard a slam behind me. I spun around to see an open door in the far corner of the lobby, to the left of the front desk window. There was no one there, just the light that flooded from the door. Then the creeping shadows, shrill, echoing laughter and growing shadows along the wall inside the door. "Oh," said the caseworker, "here comes the welcoming committee." As I stared in horror, clutching the strap of my backpack, my caseworker patted me on the shoulder for the last time. "Don't worry, honey. It'll be different this time. You'll feel right at home here, I promise." She turned to leave. I felt bile churning in my stomach. "No," I said desperately, "you can't leave me here." "Oh no, I've got to get going. I never did like clowns." And with that, she left me there. The metal doors slammed behind her and I was alone. I faced the open doorway by the front desk again. The shadows had almost entered the room and the piercing laughter was filling the lobby with sound. I ran for the front door, pounded and yanked and pushed and screamed for help, screamed for my caseworker, screamed for anyone. Please, God! I turned to see the nurse behind the glass smiling at me again, and then they entered, laughing all the while. A whole group of laughing nurses with clown faces and red hair, some male, some female, but all with the same terrifying Ronald McDonald makeup. And in the dim light of the lobby, I could see the glint of metal tools in their hands, coming up the rear with a pair of clown nurses, rolling a metal table, complete with restraints. "Get the fuck away from me!" I screamed. I pounded on the metal doors again. "Let me out of here!" They surrounded me, grabbed me as I thrashed and screamed and tried to tear myself away, laughing as I kicked and squirmed. They slammed me onto the rolling table and strapped me down. I looked around wildly. I was surrounded. "Let me go!" I screamed, twisting and turning and pulling at the restraints. They rolled me through the open doorway and down the seemingly endless white hallway. They laughed and laughed and laughed, and they waved their shiny scalpels and razors and needles mere inches from my face just to make me flinch and scream. This made them laugh even harder. The last thing I remember before one of them finally injected me was the hands. Gloved fingers prodding inside my mouth and pulling at the sides of my mouth, distorting my screams and forcing an unnatural grin into my tear-streaked, sweaty face. Hot, rancid breath in my face, and the whispered, perverted voices speaking the words. "We love to see you smile." Then, as the maniacal laughter seemed to warp and wind down like a dying record player, everything faded to black. I opened my eyes and I was blinded by a bright light above. Shielding my groggy eyes from the fluorescent bulbs, I turned on my side and looked around. Cell. Tall, white walls covered in scratch marks and stains. Small drain in the corner of the floor, my toilet perhaps. A door with no windows. And on the floor by the door, my backpack. I tried to sit up. My body ached, and the moment I sat upright, my vision started spinning. I wonder what they drugged me with. I realized that I was shivering. I looked down. I wasn't wearing my clothes anymore. I was wearing a dirty, ripped hospital gown, bright yellow with a pattern of Ronald McDonald's head all over it. Nothing underneath. I heard faint, muffled sounds from somewhere in the building. It sounded like screams. I tried to stand but couldn't keep my balance. My vision was beginning to stabilize, but my body still felt like rubber. I sank to my knees and crawled over to my backpack. Before I got there, I tried to open the door, and as expected, it was locked. I slumped onto the floor beside my backpack, and I unzipped it. All that remained inside was the photo album. They'd taken my notebooks and pens and my cell phone. Of course they did. I wearily opened the photo album, but instead of the photos that had been in there, photos of myself with my previous foster families, photos where I had attempted to look happy and hopeful, even though I knew I wouldn't be there for long. Instead of those photos, they were like crime scene photos. And in each one, I'd recognized one of my former foster families, brutally murdered and covered in blood. My heart raced and my stomach churned. I began to turn the pages quicker. Each page, a new photo, a new family, a new carnage. I realized their faces and the inside of their homes. I lived with all of these people, and now they were dead. I came to the last few pages. A photo of a house at night. Then a window of that house. Then inside the house, a dark hallway with light coming from one doorway. Then a photo of my caseworker brushing her teeth at her bathroom mirror. Then a photo of her looking at the camera in horror. Then a photo of the caseworker naked, covered in her own blood, contorted into an unnatural position in her bathtub. I turned to the last page, and written inside the back cover of the photo album were 3 words. You never existed. I felt bile rising in my stomach. I threw the book to the ground, and I crawled over to the hole in the floor, and I vomited. They were right. Having killed everyone who ever knew me, it was as though I never existed. I heard more faint screaming in the distance. I knew I had to get out. I wiped the vomit off my face with my hospital gown, and I crawled back over to my backpack. Hopefully, they hadn't found my secret weapon. I unzipped the front pocket and reached down into the very bottom. My fingers scraped the fabric, and sure enough, it was there. Flush with the seams in the bag, nearly undetectable, the pins I used for picking locks. I told you. I'm a bad kid. I leaned against the door and I listened. I could hear footsteps approaching, but just as soon as they had come, they faded into the other direction. I knew I had to work fast. I jiggled the handle with one hand and I picked the lock with the other. It was surprisingly simple. Holding the handle, I slowly pulled myself to my feet. I could maintain my balance now, and I pulled the door open, just a crack. Clown nurse darted past. My heart almost stopped, but his footsteps didn't slow or change, and soon faded. He didn't notice me. I poked my head out of the door. Seemingly endless white hallways in either direction. The distant screams were louder now, coming all around, and taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway and I closed the door behind me. I decided to go to the right. Passing doors identical to the door that I had been behind, I heard the screams and sobbing come from behind each one. I stopped for a moment at one door. I heard the crying of a child inside. I jiggled the handle to see if I could let him out. It was locked. I kept moving, looking behind me every few seconds to make sure that no nurse had come into the hallway, and then I passed a set of white double doors. I stopped for a moment. The word "play place" was written in tall, thin letters across the width of both doors. I heard more screaming coming from within, the screams of multiple people and laughter. The insane, shrill laughter of the clown nurses. I shuddered. I was afraid to find out what sort of torture was happening inside, and I knew I had to keep moving. I saw a door ahead of me with a stairway symbol. I headed for it. As I opened the door, I glanced behind me and I saw 2 clown nurses emerging from the play place room. Their white nurse outfits were covered in streaks of blood. I quickly shut myself in the stairwell, hoping they hadn't noticed me. The stairwell was dimly lit, the cement walls and rusty railings. I looked behind the door that I had just closed. There was a red number 5 on the door, so I must be on the 5th floor. I decided that I had to get to the ground level. Each footstep echoed as I began to descend the stairs. I couldn't hear the screaming anymore, just a low, deep humming sound like pipes in the walls. It was a welcome respite. I finally came to the door numbered 1. The staircase seemed to descend a few floors lower, but I stopped here and slowly peeked through the door. More white hallways. No clown nurses to be seen. So far, so good. I stepped through the door and I walked into the hallway. I noticed I couldn't hear any screaming on this floor, just the buzz of the fluorescent tube lights above. I came to the end of the hallway and another set of double doors. A large red cross, the kind that you see on that lifeguard stand or a lifeguard kit, was painted across the width of the doors. I pressed my ear to it. All I heard was a slow, rhythmic pulse like a machine at work, and faintly a beeping sound, like you'd hear in a hospital room. I knew I shouldn't open the doors. I knew this wasn't the exit. I knew that I should keep looking. But I had to see. I turned the handle. It wasn't locked. I peeked inside. It was a cavernous white room. Fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed. I saw wires hanging all around and hanging from the ceiling in rows. kids. Kids in hospital gowns like mine attached to white wooden crosses affixed to the ceiling, literally crucified. They were silent. Their heads drooping forward, their eyes either closed or staring at nothing. Some seemed to twitch a bit, but most were still. Their crosses swung back and forth, very slightly, and the hanging wires, they weren't wires. They were intravenous tubes attached to the kids' wrists, tubes sucking out their blood. I almost vomited again, right then and there. In the very center of the room, amidst the rows of hanging crosses, I could see where the rhythmic pulsing sound was coming from. A huge steel cylinder which seemed to be collecting the blood from all the tangled tubes that dangled from the kids' wrists. I opened my mouth to scream, to cry out in anger. All I could say was, "What the fuck?" And that's when the alarms began to sound. Loud, piercing, like the police sirens of hell. They must have realized that I was missing. I shut the doors and frantically glanced around the hallway to see if anyone was coming. No signs yet. I ran for the stairwell. As soon as I entered, I heard laughing from above, echoing and reverberating throughout the stairs. The clown nurses were coming. I stumbled down the stairs as fast as I could. I must have gone down another 3 stories before I reached the basement. I found myself running through a dark, sewer-like hallway with small light bulbs overhead every 10 yards or so. The smell of decay and rotting flesh grew more and more pungent as I ran. The laughter continued behind me. I managed to glance behind and see a group of them running after me. I saw them coming into the light and then becoming silhouettes again. Their smiling faces and gleaming knives and needles pushing my adrenaline to the max. I ran past alcoves full of stacks of rotting corpses, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think of anything but escape. I turned a corner and I found myself facing the metal rungs of a ladder in the wall. I climbed until my head smacked the ceiling. Below me, the shadows and laughter grew closer. Their footsteps slowed. They were close, and they knew it. I pushed at the ceiling above me, heaving upward and panting and screaming. The clowns were below me, laughing and waving their scalpels. Something cut my leg. I screamed and I pushed one last time. The ceiling gave way as a manhole cover slammed onto the asphalt above. A circular opening. I climbed out and I frantically pushed the manhole cover back over the hole, blocking out the laughter of the clowns. I laid there, on top of the manhole cover for a few minutes, as I caught my breath. Rain fell onto my skin. The turbulent night sky above was a welcome sight. I looked around. Abandoned buildings, broken glass, no lights, no cars. No sign of any life at all. A police siren somewhere in the distance. And silence. I climbed to my feet. Pain shot through my leg. I looked down and I saw the cut on my ankle where a clown nurse had slashed me. Bastards. Limping the best I could, I started to walk. "Hello?" I called out. The only answer was a distant roll of thunder. "Somebody help me, please!" Foot fell on something soft and mushy and looked down. A newspaper. Peeled it off the wet asphalt. Most of the ink had faded. I was still able to make out the date. July 13th, 1992. I dropped it and icy dread filled my stomach. I kept walking. "Can anyone hear me?" I screamed. "Please! Anyone! Please!" My words faded into delirious sobs. We stood still for a moment. The rain had soaked through the thin hospital gown. I shivered as the wind blew, and I saw a light in the distance. It was a big yellow M in the sky. McDonald's. I limped towards it. When I came to the McDonald's, I saw that, apart from the M, the rest of the building was completely dark. I walked cautiously toward the broken windows and looked inside. Darkness. I turned and surveyed the play place outdoor playground. 10-foot-tall structures, collared tubes for kids to crawl through. Sitting at one of the benches was a familiar figure. The Ronald McDonald statue. You know, the one where you could sit beside him and looks like he's got his arm around you. Every kid has seen it. I shuddered at the sight. The doors were unlocked. I walked in out of the rain. Silence. Darkness. I noticed that the decor wasn't like the modern McDonald's you see. It was still the same as it was in the 80s. The white plastic booths and the red and yellow tiles. The wind seemed to whisper through the broken windows, and I noticed something on the front counter. A black rectangle. I got closer. A laptop. A nearly new laptop. I let out a soft, delirious laugh, and I knew what I was supposed to do. I took the laptop outside. I sat beside the Ronald statue. I opened the laptop. I began to type out the story. Rain's falling on the keys, but I don't care. There's nothing left to do now but wait. As I've been noticing out of the corner of my eye. Ronald's been trying to look over my shoulder. He's laughing now. All I can do is join him. Boy, do I got a weird one for you guys. Okay, I guess I probably shouldn't say which police department I work for, or even which city or state I live in, but I can tell you that there is a desert where I live. I can also say that I work in an area that's relatively poor, so we get lots of druggies and crazies. Lots of meth labs, too. A couple weeks ago, maybe like 2:30 in the morning, we had a call about a guy digging in the middle of the desert. It was unsettling some people in the nearby neighborhood, especially since it was so late at night. Me and my partner were nearest, so we took the call. So we get there. And soon enough, and sure enough, there's a guy out there digging in the middle of the desert. We approach him, and this man's just muttering to himself, filling up a hole with dirt. He didn't respond to us the first few times we addressed him. My partner almost pulled his weapon, but eventually he realized that we were there. He was hysterical. He mumbled most of his words, kept pointing out into the desert. He didn't have any of the physical signs of being a user either. He just looked like he was crazy. There was one thing he kept saying over and over again. I swear it sounded like hot dog. The way he said it almost sounded like he was pronouncing it in German or Russian. Hachtuk. 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 But he kept pointing out in the desert. Well, I go in and I look, and I just see dozens and dozens of these little red flags. Little wire ones that you might see at the construction sites or something. And I walk out with my flashlight, and over a quarter square mile, must have been more than 50 of them just everywhere. Apparently, whatever the guy had been up to, he'd been up for a while. Well, we took the guy into the station. He didn't have any ID on him. After my reports, we decided that we should probably start digging up where the flags were in the morning, just in case. The next morning, the crew goes out digging on the site, right? Now, about half of the marked spaces are empty, but in about 12 places, the diggers keep finding chains. Usually around like 3 feet of chain, buried anywhere from 1.5 feet down to around 4 feet down. All of them sort of wrapped in on themselves. About 10 of those chains had actually been hooked into the ground. The way it seemed, the guy had been burying these chains himself, but why just chains? We didn't find anything else. Later that day, I'm back at the station when the receptionist comes and fetches me. Apparently, our new friend had somehow managed to get a hold of a pen. I get to his room, and he's just gone to town on the walls of the room that we're keeping him in with a pen. I can't share a picture of the room, but he had drawn that same shape over and over again, probably about 200 times. The shape was kind of like one of those sculptures from ancient Egypt. But we didn't find anything else at the dig site, and the guy is still at a mental hospital. It's hard to admit, but I'm still a little unnerved. What do you guys think? Update. Someone sent me the link on the old post. It was a forum post that was made by who we assume was the guy before he went crazy. It tells where this all went down, but I don't think this matters for the sake of privacy, as the guy made it public himself. Found on a metal detector enthusiast forum. Hey guys, I always thought metal detecting was a neat hobby. It's great watching videos of guys like Aqua Chinger when they find those Civil War artifacts I like. I know out here in New Mexico it's even rarer to find that kind of stuff, but I've been browsing the NMMDA forum for a few months, and last week I finally broke down and got to use that old Fisher Goldbug Pro with that 5-inch DD search coil off of eBay. Took about 2 miles outside of Los Lunas yesterday, and after a few hours and a few pennies and nickels, the meter suddenly said that it had found gold about 1.5 feet down. That's high quality metal detector if you can detect that far down, so I started digging. This is what I found. No, it's not gold. At least, I don't think it's gold, because it's black like obsidian. Maybe there's gold inside. But my first grade daughter says that the shape is an obelisk, like the Washington Memorial. It's almost like a sculpture, but it's really smooth. Can't even get a single scratch on it. Got out a tape measure, and it's exactly 1 foot 3 inches long and about 3.4 inches by 3.4 inches wide. Except for the top, of course, since it comes to a point. Tried to weigh it on our bathroom scale, but it didn't work. If anybody has any idea what it is, I sure would appreciate it. Thank you, guys. Update. Thanks, everybody, for your feedback, but it just isn't feasible to put it back exactly where I found it. I filled in the hole before I left, which I understand is standard metal detecting etiquette. Couldn't put it back exactly where I found it if I wanted to. Update 2. There's something... is there something you guys ain't telling me? I don't understand the urgency you guys all seem to have in your responses. Is there some unspoken rule amongst New Mexico metal detectors about black obelisks? Update 3. Guys, I can't put it back where I found it. I'm sorry, I'm an amateur. I don't know you're supposed to carry little flags whenever you go out. Is that just a New Mexico thing? My buddy in North Carolina says that they don't do that out here. Maybe if you guys actually talked about these sorts of things, beginners like us would know. Why the little flags? Update 4. Since nobody's actually given me any detail about what I found, and it's just telling me to put it back exactly where I found it, I'm just going to call the UNM History Department. I'm really disappointed in you guys. I would have expected you to be more forthcoming and detailed with someone who's new to all this. The other metal detecting forums I follow from other states might not have a clue of what I found, but they're at least all polite and supportive, and they all seem to think that you guys are very rude. Sort of disillusioned. Update number 4. No, I'm not going to delete my messages about the obelisk on the other forums. And might I add, the history department is about as useful as you all are. I live in New Mexico for 6 years, and I've always thought everyone here was very nice. Way more relaxed than people back east. Yes, I was wrong. Update 5. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for the way I acted, guys. I was wrong. You were right, and I deleted my messages on other forums. I buried it out in the desert this morning. I'm not sure if it's exactly where I found it, but I really hope and pray that that's enough. I think it's really close. I think that the bush I buried it next to is the same one. Update 6. It came back. Please, I need anyone's advice, please. It doesn't have to be on the forum. You can message me directly. You can call me or you can text me. Please. Update 7. Why aren't any of you answering me? Please, help. Update 8. Please. Most of me wants to say that this guy just went crazy. Like he had a nervous breakdown or something. Some people on the old post had mentioned psychosis, but the fact that other people were telling him to bury whatever he found means that something actually went wrong, right? Granted, all we're reading is a repost. Maybe there never was any other posts, and it was just a crazy guy talking to himself on the internet. Maybe he never even really found anything. I hope so. You know, I know weird stuff happens sometimes. Some of the guys on the force have crazy stories, so I guess this is my own crazy story. It's just the way this whole thing has made me feel. Hoping this is the last weird story that I have to live through. And I'm a cop, right? So I've seen some horrifying stuff. All that stuff can be explained, you know. Bad things happen because of bad people that do bad things. Put that into your own little box and keep it separate for the rest of your life. And whenever you can't put whatever it is in that box, you just drink until you can. Whatever went down with this guy. I don't have a box in my mind to put it into. And I think that's what's really freaking me out the most. Update 2. The thing found me. I don't know why. Maybe it can smell fear. That doesn't matter. I'm afraid. The things that it whispers are horrifying. I'm not the same person that I was before it found me. The other man tried chaining it down into the ground. I used cement. I dug a hole 8 feet deep. I put it at the very bottom before covering it in 3 feet of cement. Then I buried it all. It just came back again. And again. And again. And I'll do anything. Anything. To stop the whispers. His mouth is a door. Where do you want to go? He whispers. A tongue, short and pink, slips out and hangs over a generous lower lip. Eel slick, a leafy gutter after a late October rainstorm. Far away, a planet annihilates into its sun. To them, she replies, and reaches with a tentative hand. The door widens to accommodate. Skin splits, then knits. New teeth sprout from elongated gums. Enamel amaryllises. Hand, wrist, forearm. The door makes room. It did for me. I was the first to try. And succeed. How far until? She asks, only to hush right then. She can feel it, I can tell. 5 fingers, finesse, frigid, fleshy folds. Folds, finesse back. Hot tears leak down the creases of her face. The bundle in my lap twitches. Not yet, I instruct, and stroke it grimacing. It mules, a low, plaintive drone. Eyes of every size erupt under my calm palm. Shooting soap bubbles. Staring sea foam, shifting sockets. My arm is still wet with the doorman's saliva. My fingers are black. Across the room she gasps. Her pain now matches mine. Cold spit, colder, deeper. Frostbitten fingertips, even. Eventually amputation. When I was young, my father forced me to deliver a stillborn calf. It had been dead a while, rotting where it should have been growing. Perverse inversions. It came apart as I extracted it. Warm, wet, warmer, deeper, slippery lifelessness, memorable dismemberment. The mother cow understood the loss. She mourned, bellowing and screaming until my father shot her 6 days later. A waste, he remarked. At the mouth of the doorman, the woman is pulling. She sobs. I recognize the pain, physical agony, emotional torture. She winces when she glances over and glimpses what I'm holding. She hadn't been able to see it before. Something happens when you touch one yourself. We change. It all changes. A swollen river overmasters weakened banks. When you get to be my age, my father told my child self as we butchered the mother cow, you can take part in a process. I listened without speaking. Flies swimming around the bar turn abattoir. You'll meet the man who is also a bridge, and you can help him bring all of this to an end. Memories of the mother cow, immobilized and shrieking as I rooted through her body to dredge out the remains of her baby, swirled through my head. A howling hurricane wind, warping and bending a sapling. Her blood glinted off my father's knife. Her baby fertilized the pasture where the other cows fed. They too would die, as would everything, ad infinitum. I stared into his face as he spoke the words that would matter most. You can plant these seeds. You can ignite the last fire. A stellar doorman overmasters universal boundaries. The doorman and the woman are separate again. In her arms, writhing and keening and wailing, is what she'd been reaching for. It extends its limbs to touch its partner, still nestled in my lap. Why did you come? The woman asks. Her wrist and hand are black, chips of frozen saliva break off and fall to the floor like heavy snowflakes. We hadn't shared any words to this point. She simply arrived at the doorman's location moments after I did. My father said, I know when to come here, I told her. That I'd meet a man who is also a bridge. She nods. A man told me in a dream when I was little. It said I had to plant the seeds and end the cycle. And last week, it told me where to go. Around the things we retrieve from the doorman, light and shadow ripple like water in a disturbed pond. Their limbs stretch across the room, fleshy ropes, black skin, infinite eyes. We could feel them pulling towards one another, their strengths increases. Do you think there's going to be a real fire? The woman questions. I don't know, I answer. But I'm ready for it all to be over. For everyone. Forever. She nods, moving closer to me. The doorman's mouth closes and he splits out of the room. I know I'll never see him again. When the woman and I are within arm's reach of one another, the two things we retrieved, the seeds, I now know, pull themselves from our arms and slam together. They float midair, limbs and eyes and flesh seething, and ripples grow. The woman and I feel an intense sensation of pulling. Smaller objects around the room are being drawn to the union of seeds, then larger ones. Soon us, then all. Not a fire, I tell the woman. Something greater. She smiles. She knows. So we wait. A swollen river overmasters weakened banks. A stellar doorman overmasters universal boundaries. A union of seeds overmasters infinite suffering. And everything stops. And nothing is self. Nothing. Nothings. Every day I tell myself I'm going to stop drinking. Yet every day I find myself picking up the glass once more. It's a good thing I don't drink that much daily. I know my liver will probably fall apart by the time I reach my 60s, but I've yet to come across a better way to calm the storm that's been raging in my mind ever since I met him. Back in 2013, I requested my leave from the Siberian observation mission. At that point, I'd grown tired from seeing all the pointless bloodshed that was going on there. I had been a soldier pretty much my whole adult life up to that point, and being so powerless was probably just a tad too much for me. Once I was granted my release, I had decided to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It was a lovely trip, all in all. One evening, I decided to clear my head at a local bar. I was sitting there, completely zoned out, as some silly club music blared through the speakers. My head was in the clouds. That is until a gruff voice snapped me back into reality. "What does the United Nations soldier do in such a place?" My mind snapped back into fight mode as my head snapped sharply to my left. A bearded man was sitting next to me. He was visibly a few inches taller than me, and his smug expression made me a little uneasy, not to mention the fact that he was not supposed to know my profession, or so I thought back then. I was cut off short. "How do you know you'd like to ask?" he retorted. A wide smile formed on his face. A knot began forming inside my stomach. I almost felt sick with the buildup of dread. I began clenching my fists. A million thoughts whirled through my mind. I couldn't fathom at the time the existence of this person. "The Lord of Flies knows many a thing." He chuckled at me further, adding to my nervousness. I was about to explode at him and demand answers in regards to his strange behavior and impossible knowledge. However, the man reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out some old coin. He proceeded to toss it into the air as my eyes followed every single movement of his. As the coin spun through the air, it started slowing down mid-flight, and everything around me. The music stopped playing, the lights above had stopped moving, and the coin froze in the air. The sight made my heart sink. My fear was probably evident as the man was trying hard not to burst into laughter. None of this made any sense to me back then, and all I could muster was a soft, unconfident, "What?" Time stood still around me, quite literally. Everything was simply frozen in time. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to think. I couldn't move as the whole situation was too hard to process. The man reached out his hand to me, offering a handshake. "Beelzebub. My pleasure, Daniel." What? I couldn't speak. I felt sick. This was too much for me to handle, and I threw up on the floor. My head was spinning. My heart raced. I felt awful. There was no mistaking it. I was approached by some sort of something supernatural. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to know my name. I wiped my face and I looked at the man whom I assumed was the devil at that point. He had lowered his arm and took a sip of his beer. "I know it's quite shocking, all of this. My first rodeo with you humans." Not wanting to piss off someone who could stop time and probably knew more about me than I wanted anyone to, I cautiously asked him, Are you the devil?" The man burst out into a maddening laughter, which had somewhat put me at ease. "Oh, father, this joke again," he mused to himself as some beer had spilled on his coat, clearly amused by the lack of awareness towards higher beings such as himself. No, I'm not the devil. It's a common misconception, however," he proceeded to note. "See, angels, demons, whatever, they're all the same kind. There's no big fight or even a divide between us. There's not so much of a hierarchy or rules set between us. We're truly equal to one another. Everything you know about us is a human fiction," he continued speaking. "Every time Father tried speaking to you humans, you go mad. Guess you're still not high enough level to communicate with the old man." This made very little sense to me, as it was the opposite from what I was taught my whole life. I wasn't sure if I could believe this person or not. After all, he was claiming to be a demon. I guess he had noticed the doubt written all over my face as he made a snarky remark towards me. "If I was lying, wouldn't I be tempting you with something right now? The Prince of Gluttony and yada yada." "No, I just..." Yeah, I get it, Daniel. You've been indoctrinated to believe some weird anthropocentric story. Mind you that there are millions, perhaps even billions of species who are even more intelligent than that of your kind. To be honest, I'm pretty certain that there are beings who are more advanced than my father somewhere out there. They're probably beings higher than God. I had nothing to say. I was completely shocked by this revelation. While on the one hand, the things he was saying were making sense, on the other hand, they weren't making any sense at all. So how does this whole cosmic order thing work then? I asked. Anything with a consciousness mechanism is what you define as a soul. That includes me and you and everyone else on this planet with a complex neural system. Even Father has that sort of thing. Now, nothing is really eternal. Eventually, everything dies. At one point, every sentient being will pass away, he answered. Even God? I was unaware if I was even wanting to hear the answer to that question, yet I asked anyway. Yeah, someday. In the future. You are aware of the fact that he is an all-creator of everything. As obvious as this should have been at that point, the sentence sent chills down my spine. I sank deeper and deeper into my chair. Well, here's the kicker, though. One thing you humans got right, in a way. Hell is real. Circumstances around it, what you got wrong. What do you mean? Don't the wicked go there? I asked him in response. Oh, no, not the wicked, but the guilty, he proclaimed as he hoisted up his cup of beer into the air. Guilty? I asked, puzzled. Yeah. Well, if you die feeling guilty over something, if it turns into a negative energy and your consciousness goes into that dimension where it has to rid itself of said guilt. It has to be a major thing, however. You feel guilty for something extremely minor, you're most likely to just dissipate into the universe. Once he'd finished speaking about the inner workings of the universe, I looked directly into his green eyes and asked, with as much confidence as I could muster, so why are you telling me all of this? He smiled that unsettling smile once again. Because I need your opinion on something, Daniel. Let's have a walk, shall we? He got up from his chair and began walking towards the entrance of the bar. At first, I was hesitant to do anything, and I watched him walk for a few moments before I heard him call out to me. Not wanting to piss off a thing that could stop time and probably murder me on a whim, I got to my feet, ignoring the dried puke on my shoes, and started catching up with the man. Once I reached him, he was at the bar's entrance, pressing his hand against the door. As the door swung open, a bright light engulfed me, blinding me for a moment. It felt as if a flash grenade was thrown straight at me. The light was so bright, it almost hurt. After an agonizing few seconds, the light began dispersing, and familiar sights greeted my eyes. No way, I blurted under my breath. We're in Syria, next to some rebel encampment, Beelzebub announced, almost gleefully. I looked around, and the bar building was right behind me. However, it was surrounded by the nearly endless sands of the Syrian desert. I was in this place before. There was no mistaking it. This was the Syrian desert. As I was trying to process whatever was going on around me, Beelzebub asked me, Tell me, Daniel, do you believe that all humans deserve to live? He caught me off guard, but this was probably the easiest answer that I had to give that day. Yes, I do, I answered, still eyeing my surroundings. Even the sadistic band of serial murderers and rapists in this encampment before us, he asked again, pointing at the makeshift paramilitary compound. Yeah. Even them. If what you say about them's true, they should be detained, tried. But they do deserve to live. Killing them won't make it any better. It was still an easy question. I don't believe killing will ever salvage anything. I doubt the death penalty is a good way to rid ourselves of crime, even to this day. I see. Well, follow me. I need to show you something that might change your mind. Beelzebub began walking towards the bar building once more, pushing the door open again. I stumbled across the sands after him. The alcohol I had consumed earlier was starting to take effect again. The bright light blinded me again, followed by a freezing breeze that sent chills through my whole body. Once I had regained my sight, I found myself standing at the beginning of a large stone bridge, above a deep, dark pit. The longer I stared down, the more I came to realize that I could not see the bottom of this hole. The dread started eating at me once more when another gust of freezing wind hit my body. Soon after, I began hearing screaming coming from up above me. I turned my head upward ever so slightly to see a human body, a naked human body, falling towards me from up above. The body was alive, I could tell so, as it was flailing its limbs about, the body's screams growing louder with each passing moment. When the body was mere inches from me, I saw its face. Oh God, its face. The despair was permanently etched into its features. There was a fearful stare in its glaring eyes. The cheek muscles were stretched beyond what I thought was possible due to the constant screaming. Drool and tears flew all over. I know that we shared eye contact for the briefest of moments, but I've never seen someone in so much pain before. Is this... I mumbled as the body flew past me into the seemingly never-ending darkness below. Yes, Beelzebub noted, with a smile stretching from ear to ear. He seemed to be almost glowing in that god-forsaken place. Long after the body flew past me, I could hear its constant screaming. It kept on ringing in my ears for a long time after I had left that cursed abyss. Beelzebub led me to atop the stone bridge for quite some time, and the longer I walked the bridge, the more I wanted out of there. These bodies, they kept on falling all over. God, some hit the bridge, massive blood stains. They kept on falling. They just slipped downwards, back into the bottomless maw of their Abaddon. I'm so sorry, it's hard bringing that up in detail. Even though it never leaves me, even though it haunts me in my dream. After some walking, Beelzebub stopped me and he asked me to look down to my left. When I looked, I saw a piece of rock protruding from the darkness itself. On top of the rock, there was a sea of people, walking, one after another in circles. In an unbreakable harmony, they marched forever, one after the other. Each step seemed more fatigued than the last one. Beelzebub told me that those were the people who died harboring the guilt of following a bad leader. These were Nazi soldiers, terrorists, mob soldiers, all sorts of weak-minded individuals who knew they were following the wrong leader and still went on with it. Beelzebub even called them pathetic for harboring such a guilt, noting that these were his least favorite kind of hell spawns. I felt bad for them. I do understand their guilt. The reason I left my active service in Syria because of my powerlessness, brought upon me by a set of regulations that do not strive to prevent as much suffering as possible. And I hated that feeling. I hated feeling powerless, and yet, look at me now. More of a powerless man than ever before. He kept on walking across the stone bridge for some more time before a rancid stench filled my nostrils. Beelzebub told me to look to my right. There was another protrusion made of stone, peeking through the darkness, and on top of the protrusion there was a pile of dark substances, made of what smelled like feces. I had a hard time looking at that direction, as the stench was way too vile for me. Beelzebub, on the other hand, was enjoying the view of a human pulling himself out of the pile, only to be slunk back down into it by another human's arms as the latter tried to pull himself out as well, as only to suffer the same fate at the hands of another. Can we leave? It stinks too bad, I cried out from underneath my shirt-covered mouth. Beelzebub just grunted in approval and led me on across the bridge of stone. Soon enough, we were standing at the edge of a forked path. One diversion was made of stone, another of some pulsating fleshy mass, and another was made of sand. Beelzebub led me on the path of sand. I'll let you meet someone, Daniel. Someone very important. He's been here for nearly 2 millennia. Beelzebub remarked with some glee in his tone. 2,000 years, I muttered. And I couldn't even bear staying another hour in this place, and yet someone was there for 2,000 years. Beelzebub did not speak for a while as we walked on that sandy path. I grew more and more anxious with each moment, to the point of trembling. My mind was racing, my breath was quick. Shallow. Sorry, I need another moment to relax. Properly. Eventually, we reached a large sand dune. It's the biggest sand dune I'd ever seen. It was so massive, it towered everything else in sight. The literal sand giant in the middle of a world made of pure darkness. "I'd like you to meet Gallus Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus," announced Beelzebub in a gleeful tone. A young, tall, and skinny man dressed in a bloodied tunic strutted out of the sand dune. He had a very fixated, cold stare in his eyes, like he was bulging his pupils out at us. The man just stared for a few minutes. The surrounding atmosphere was so tense you could cut it in half. He shrieked like a wounded animal and fell onto the sand, screaming obscenities at the old Roman deities and the Senate. He then began shrieking about how he should be the god of this world, the god of all worlds, from the Capitoline Hill down to the depths of Tartarus. He began rolling around in the sand, screaming at the top of his lungs that he is the emperor god of all. He should have made them fear him more. He then proceeded to shove sand down his own throat, first with his hands, and then he just fell on the ground and started swallowing the sand beneath him with his mouth. He wouldn't stop that for a while, not even when it was clear that he was choking on the sand. I swear he could see some sand pouring down from his nasal cavities. The man was a complete wreck. At some point, his stomach couldn't contain any more of the substances, and he threw it all out, producing a vile choking sound as he did. He then started rolling in his own vomit, shrieking about fear and control, and no matter how long he rolled in the sand, he kept his stare fixated on me. There was something really unnerving about his almost fish-like hazel eyes being locked on me. He began screaming obscenities again as he ran onto the top of the dune while I watched in pity as he hurled himself down into its sands. His body rolled in the sand like a rag doll tossed about. I could hear the sickening cracking sounds of his bones echo throughout the space as his body was being folded in unnatural angles by his own momentum. And eventually his broken body landed at my feet. The body laid there as the limbs were folded awkwardly. His body was positioned on its belly with the head turned 180 degrees. His goddamn fish eyes were staring straight at me. I felt a knot build up in my stomach again. I was sure that I would throw up again. I could literally feel the food rising up my esophagus. "Oh dear God," the body whispered. It startled me. A moment later, I found myself back at the bar, next to Beelzebub, shaking with fear as my mind was racing. Nothing made sense to me anymore. I looked at Beelzebub, and the back of my head began throbbing, as if I was hit with a hammer across the head. My vision started blurring, my ears began ringing. I don't. I managed to blurt out as I was trying to fight through my sudden headache. "So did your meeting with Little Sandals make you change your mind about the value of all human lives?" Beelzebub asked. "I don't know." I forced myself to respond weakly as my head felt as if it was about to blow up. Beelzebub drunk up all his remaining beer and said, "Well, that's a shame, because I already slaughtered that whole Syrian encampment." As he said that, the pain in my head began subsiding, and disturbing images began popping up in my mind. I've seen it. I've seen it all. The way he tore them apart, the way he ripped them to shreds. I felt the tears. I felt the tears streaming down my cheeks just like they do now. I can't get the image of him making a gun sign with his fingers, shoving it down a kneeling man's mouth and blowing up his skull. God. Beelzebub was gone after that. I heard that damn coin fall into the wood. I placed my head on my arms and I began crying. I couldn't stop. I can't. He was gone, but the guilt was there. It's all my fault. All of this is my fault. I followed him there. Everything was mine. Sorry. Please pardon me. I'm just a sorrowful drunk with a lot on his plate, and I know that. The devil doesn't bargain for his souls. No, he simply guilts their owner straight to hell, where he can watch them suffer for as long as he wants them to. And I'll drink to that son of a gun. Cheers. He told everything that he knew about him, and one by one, this cryptid grew on them. They argued over who should study it, when Michael, being the leader, announced that everybody would do this, as the cryptozoology's final cryptid. He read everything that he could find about the Mothman, and through reading the witness reports, found a possible hideout for it, a nest. Using all of the group's funds, they convinced the principal to give them a field trip to the West Virginia Ordnance Works, an abandoned World War II TNT factory. The bus driver drove 7 miles away from Point Pleasant and told them to come back if anything went wrong, and above all, to stay together. The 6 kids jumped off the bus and slowly walked towards the first building of the Ordnance Works. Along the way, each kid muttered to each other about how the air smelled like smoke and how freezing it was. Michael was the most excited. This was going to be amazing. He daydreamed about walking into the enigmatic-looking building and being startled by Mothman sitting up on a perch. Then discovering Mothman was friendly and riding him far away on the breeze. He smiled at the thought, but was interrupted when he saw that he was at the door. He nearly squealed with excitement as he opened the door and held it for his friends to come through. They crept through the doorway with their shoes making a dragging sound against the dirty vinyl floor, and came to a stop once they were all inside. Michael let go and walked forward in silence. Everyone jumped when the door made a loud echoing slam that seemed to go on for hours. The building was dirty inside. Brick walls, broken machines here and there, and one shattered window, which was the only source of light in the dimly lit building. They stood there in silence for a second before Michael broke it by taking a step forward. He looked back at his friends, and they followed his lead and came forward. They walked through the large main room, dragging their feet as they walked. Ashley glanced out the window and saw what looked like a raven or a crow flying away. She sighed, letting a cloud of warm air come out of her mouth, and looked ahead. Michael opened the door for them to go through, atop a set of rusty stairs. Though Joshua insisted that they should go through another door just underneath. Ashley insisted yet another door, and Zack, fed up with the bickering, suggested they split up into groups. Jack went with Joshua, Ashley went with Ben, and Michael went with Kaylee. They agreed to meet up at the bus if anything went wrong. Michael grabbed the flashlight out of his backpack and turned it on. He nervously smiled at Kaylee and continued on through the door. He opened it and closed it as he entered, which again made an echoing slam. They crept down the hallway, which was pitch black aside from the flashlight. They felt uneasy as they couldn't see anything 4 feet ahead of them. So, how are you holding up, Kaylee? Fine. Something's off. What do you mean? She was cut off by the sound of another door slam. They quickly spun around and heard slow, scraping steps coming closer. They stared in horror and silence as the steps became louder and louder. 2 dim red lights appeared down the hallway. Kaylee wanted to ask what they were, but her throat seemed to swell shut. The lights grew brighter and bigger as the footsteps came closer, and Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He stepped backwards, nervously. There was one last step, and then they stopped. The 2 huge red lights seemed to glow. Michael's arm twitched as he slowly raised the flashlight towards the red orbs. It shone to reveal a humanoid creature with glossy features. Its feet were scaly and green with long black talons that seemed to dig into the ground. Its shoulders were about 1 foot taller than its head and were tipped with long black wings. And its head, it seemed to be pushed down into its chest. It had huge red eyes, as big as dinner plates with no pupils and no light, yet they seemed to glow. Its mouth appeared to be either missing or covered by feathers. The 2 children stared at the creature, too scared to move. The creature stood there motionless and expressionless. Michael attempted to whisper, "Run!" to Kaylee, but all that came out was a loud squeak. On hearing this, the creature's eyes seemed to become even brighter, and it let out a horrible, otherworldly screeching noise, which reminded Michael of a scream from a horror film and an ambulance siren mixed into one. It unfolded its wings and charged at Michael screamed at Kaylee to run, grabbing her hand and trying to pull her, but Kaylee wouldn't budge. Her face was stuck in an expression of sheer terror, and she was staring the creature in the eyes. Michael tugged and tugged on her arm, but she wouldn't budge. The creature was practically on top of them. Michael sighed, and he let go. He ran down the hall, gasping for breath. He heard a short scream lasting for only a second. And then nothing. The creature's eyes shone through the darkness, and it turned towards him. He screamed and continued to sprint down the hall. Thoughts raced through his head about what might have happened if he was caught, and how he would escape. He looked around, desperate for an exit or a hiding place, but to no avail. He glanced behind him and saw it gaining on him, fast. He felt his stomach turn and sweat rolling down his face. He turned forward again and tried to run faster. And as he ran, he saw a door on the side of the hallway. Michael grasped it and slammed through it. He stopped quickly. Locked. He looked to his left. He saw the eyes growing closer and closer. He screamed again, frantically turning the knob back and forth. The door opened. He ran inside and left the door slightly ajar. He backed away behind a table in the room and prayed that it wouldn't find him. He heard the scraping footsteps again, then heard them slow. He held his hand over his mouth so he couldn't hear him breathing. He was so terrified that tears rolled down his face. Through the blur of his tears he saw there was a hand mirror in the room. He held it up to see behind him. There it was. He yelped and turned around to see its red eyes gazing down on him as the silent creature leapt over the table. When the field trip had ended, Zack, Ben, Josh, and Ashley met outside in the snow. They asked each other if they'd seen Michael or Kaylee, but no one had. They sighed, puffed out clouds of warm air, and kicked their feet off the ground. They were interrupted by a sudden ominous, echoing screech. They stopped, sighing, and they turned, looking at the building. The creature flew out through the shattered window. As it flew, it twitched and writhed, and seemed to fall and take flight again as it flew by. One small, inky drop landed on Ashley's hand. A drop of blood. I have a friend, Thomas, who works as a freelance artist creating booths and installations for event shows. He's quite talented at designing interactive presentations for companies to showcase their products. The last time we got together, he told me they had signed on to be part of something big, and he wasn't allowed to talk to it due to an NDA. Then, this past week, he included me as blind carbon copy in the following email. As soon as I finished reading this, I gave Thomas a ring, but the call went straight to voicemail. I drove over to see him, but when I buzzed at his apartment, there was no answer. His truck is in the parking lot, so at this point I can't tell if he's just not answering, or if he's not there. I know I don't have to wait to file a missing persons report, but I'm going to give him a day to call me back. Then I'm taking this to the police. To Charles Fetterman, subject, Beyond Vanta Black Project. Mr. Fetterman, my name is Thomas Laurent. I am one of the artists recruited by Mr. Gustav for the Beyond Vanta Black or the BVB project for your company. Now, I'll beat around the bush here, sir. Sir, I'm scared out of my wits. When I was first approached and offered the chance to work with the next step in Vanta Black, it was like winning the lottery. Vanta Black's nearly 100% absorption is a fantastic achievement. I assumed that the only possible next step was perfect 100% light absorption, but when I was shown how BVB not only absorbed all light, but even some of the scattered light of the surrounding area, I was astounded. The way it strips away the defined edges of an object, like it's enveloping the thing in a black fog, is breathtaking. I'm telling you this because I assume you've never actually seen BVB used before. If you had, you would not have approved the production of it. The color is unnatural, sir. It doesn't belong in this world. When we look up at the night sky, we think we see the pure absence of light, but we aren't. Light reflects off the atmosphere. Light from the earth and moon and other stars, it protects us from the true emptiness of the void. BVB is the void, Mr. Fetterman. It extends beyond the boundaries we give it and sucks away the light from everything around it. I'm writing you today because something has happened. I, along with 2 other artists, Genevieve Lavar and Pieter Dartu, were asked to come up with 3 unique exhibits which show off the glory of Beyond Vanta Black, which we did. My own art installation remains down in your research department, unfinished, which shall remain as I have no intention of working further on it. Miss Laver's idea was a room, the inside of which was completely painted with BVB, save one wall, which was installed with a full-length mirror from floor to ceiling. I've been inside the room, and it is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. Imagine stepping into absolute nothingness, everything. Every step you're unable to determine if your foot is going to touch solid ground or not. To make matters worse, she had the floor installed at a slant, so as you try to walk forward towards the center, you're going up an incline, but can't see the angle at which it goes. There's a single white light in the center of the ceiling, for the matter of allowing whoever was inside to at least see themselves, otherwise it'd be like not existing at all, just pure blackness. Because of the unique properties of BVB, though, you can't actually see the light in the ceiling, even when staring directly at it. Once the door is sealed, the occupant is trapped inside with only the reflection. The effect is unnerving. Yesterday, after Miss Laver finished her project, she shut herself inside the room, I presume to see how it looked. I was busy in my own area, working on my project. Half an hour later, I heard yelling. Hurrying down the hall to her room, I saw a crowd of people surrounding the area, and I was quickly ushered away before I could see what was going on. After things quieted down, I managed to ask one of your engineers what had happened, and he told me that someone had gone to check on Miss Laver and found the poor woman sprawled in the center of her room, bloody and crying. She had clawed out her own eyes, Mr. Fetterman. Somehow her experience in the room drove her to take her own sight. When I asked Mr. Sorensen about it, he told me only that Genevieve had had an accident, but she was taken to the hospital and she would be okay. As I mentioned, I've been in the room myself, having gone in later that day. Security had cornered off the room, but nobody was monitoring the area, so it was difficult to get inside. The effect of the room's design was that BVB blackened interior and slanted floor is almost instantaneous. Within seconds, I felt nauseated and had to resort to crawling to reach the middle of the room. At the time, watching as my hands disappeared into the black fog. As I went, my need for visual stimuli forced me to keep my eyes on the mirror across the room. In it, I started to see things that couldn't possibly exist. First, the air seemed to fill with swirling tendrils of color, followed by sparks of light, like the flashbulb of a camera floating, and ghostly, disembodied eyes watching me. Worst of all, though, was my reflection looking back at me. I don't know how. Maybe the floor was curved towards the mirror, the wall, or the lack of defined space, messing with my sense of direction. All I know is I found myself crawling towards my reflection, rather than the center of the room. Or worse, my reflection was crawling towards me, staring at me, watching me approach, me watching it approach. I tried to change direction, but I swear to you, it kept crawling towards me no matter how I tried to orient myself, and the more I looked into the eyes of my own reflection, the less human it appeared. Every second, it was like watching my face smear like a painting. My eyes, cheeks, nose, lips turned runny like melted wax. But the one moment I'll never forget, the image seared into my brain of the entire experience, was when I stopped in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. It stared back at me, trying to stand up. As I raised my head, I found myself looking over the shoulder of my own reflection and seeing my face again, behind the reflection, also looking over it. In other words, the face I had come to accept as my own was not. There was someone else between me and the mirror, someone who, even as the realization came rushing at me, stared up at me with the same horrified expression on its face, its features melting. It was too much. I was ready to follow Genevieve and claw my own eyes out, and the only reason I'm here, able to tell you about it now, is that I let it go. I let myself fall backward, striking my head on the floor in the process, and I blacked out a bit. But I remember rolling down the slanted floor, hitting the wall. The door must have been swung open from the force because when I came to, I could see out into the hallway, and I dragged myself out, and I swear, before I got out and shut the door, I looked back and I saw my reflection, only it was standing in the center of the room, watching me leave. That room is cursed. BVB has turned it into a residence of something sinister and malevolent. That's not even half of it, Mr. Fetterman. Piotr's plan was the polar opposite of Miss LeVar's. Rather than a person in a room devoid of light, he had your team help him build a full coverage cloth bodysuit using the BVB process. Now, everything upsetting about LeVar's room, one could explain away as tricks of the mind, ignoring the fact that she's currently missing. What happened to Piotr, though, I assure you, cannot be explained. His suit was finished a week before Miss LeVar completed her room. I watched him be helped into the suit for the first time. The team struggled to find where his legs went and his arms, and once he had all 4 limbs clothed, they still had to find the zipper and hood to completely seal him in. Upon donning the full bodysuit of BVB, the effect was truly astounding. Piotr became a foggy black silhouette. You couldn't tell if you were looking directly at him. He had his workroom installed, and almost 24 large floor lamps drowning out every angle with harsh lighting, and still the suit cast a shadow. Nobody else in the room had a shadow, but Piotr and his suit did. Even more amazing, when he moved, he left a trail of blackness, a sort of afterimage of where he had been. I've never seen anything like it. He put the BVB suit on for short intervals every day, increasing the length that he spent inside each time. He told me he enjoyed the way it unnerved the people around him. I asked him what it was like inside, and he remarked, "I can see inside you. I can see your bones." I'm not sure if he was joking or not. Piotr spent every workday setting up and taking photos of himself against various backdrops to see how the BVB of the suit affected the pictures. There was one I saw him standing in front of a glass box filled with water. The water looked like ink. Piotr told me that the way water refracts light seems to magnify the BVB's absorption effects. After LeVar's incident, but before I went into her room and experienced the horror of that emptiness firsthand, I rushed to Piotr's dressing room to tell him what had happened. But he had been wearing the suit since before I got to work, the longest amount of time they'd ever kept it on. He was sitting at his desk, clad completely in the BVB bodysuit. I told him of LeVar, and he became understandably distraught, asking me to help him out of the suit so that we could go to the hospital. At first, I couldn't find the zipper. My hands would disappear in the foggy blackness of the suit's effects. Eventually, I found it, and I unzipped him. There was nothing inside, Mr. Fetterman. The suit fell away as if draped on a frame of empty air. The hood deflating like a balloon and dropping to the floor along with the rest of the materials. And stranger yet, Piotr still seemed to be inside the suit. It was pulled up on the floor in an undefinable pile, like a hole in the floor, but I could hear him from inside it, and wherever he was, he sounded terrified. I could hear him start to scream, echoing out from the suit's interior like he was falling through a great endless void, his voice never fading off like it does as somebody falls away. He was always right there screaming, calling my name, begging me to get him out. And I gathered up the material and I tried shaking it, thinking maybe I could shake him out of the hole, but I had to drop it quickly because of the way my hands disappeared inside it. I was afraid that I'd fall into the suit as well. I immediately hurried to Mr. Sorensen's office across the research area and told him about Piotr. He seemed more put off than concerned, made a quick phone call, then told me to stay put, while he marched off to Piotr's room with a group of men from your security. I sat around in his office for a couple of hours before he finally returned with a gentleman named Mr. Klein, one from your legal department. They assured me that Piotr was all right. that what I had seen was simply the BVB playing tricks on my eyes. They fed me a bunch of hogwash about how my vision hadn't fully adjusted to the bright lighting of the room, and then instructed me to sign a form to waive my rights towards speaking about either of the incidents. It was after that, after they had someone escort me back to my own work area, that I ventured over to Genevieve's room and experienced its horror myself. That was yesterday, Mr. Fetterman. I called in sick this morning with no intention of going in today or any other day out of the fear of my own safety. Already my phone has rung at least 20 times this morning from different unknown callers. Mr. Sorensen has tried to reach me half an hour ago and left me in this cryptic voicemail saying, "I hope we don't have to initiate a breach of contract clause. I've looked over my contract with your company, Demtronic, but I still have no idea what he meant by that. And it sounds like a threat. There's something evil in Beyond Vanta Black, Mr. Fetterman, something Mr. Sorensen does not want people to know about. Miss Lever is missing. Mr. Edartu is missing, and I'm afraid that I'm going to go missing as well, and I hope that I'm not making a grave mistake by trusting you with this information. Please contact me via this email or the number provided below. Sincerely, Thomas Lawrence." My wife and I have always lived a quiet life in the country with our son, Wesley. Our 9-acre property is surrounded to the north and the east by a forest, where Wesley would often go play with his friends or by himself. For his 8th birthday, I had gone into the forest with Wesley to help him make his own tree fort, where he could stash his comic books, Game Boys, toys, and treasures that he would find while exploring the woods behind our house. He amassed quite the collection of interesting rocks and bugs, which he stored in mason jars in his forest base, and he spent most of his free time just a few hundred yards away from our house. It was a peaceful life that we had for ourselves. I would take our car into work on the weekdays and bring my wife to town right after Wesley's bus arrived to take him to school. Each day was the same routine, and we spent the weekends together at the house. In short, we were all very happy. This week is the 6th anniversary of my son Wesley's disappearance. To this day, we don't know what happened to him on that brisk autumn evening, but from the moment our 12-year-old son left the house, we had a sneaking suspicion he was never coming back. On Friday, August 3rd, 2013, our daily morning ritual happened as it always had. I would wake up, eat breakfast with Kim and Wesley, and then wait for the bus to arrive. Wesley had a half day at school today, so he would return home before me or my wife were able to get home and watch him. This wasn't a big deal. He was 12 and could look after himself for a few hours. We told him to call my cell phone as soon as he got home after school that day to make sure that he was home safely. As Wes climbed up the stairs onto the bus, my wife began to tremble and eventually break into tears. Neither of us knew what she was crying for, but we waved our son goodbye as both climbed into the car to finish off the work week. My cell phone rang at exactly 12:33 that afternoon. My iPhone played the default marimba tone, and I saw I was receiving a call from our home landline. It must have been Wesley, who had just gotten off the bus and ran into our home, obeying my instructions to call. When I slid my finger across the screen and answered the phone, the only thing I heard was the empty dial tone of our home landline. As if he hadn't typed out my number yet. I called out his name a few times through my cell, but there was nothing. I tried calling back, but there was no answer. He did as he was instructed, called Dad as soon as he got home, and must have sprinted out the door to go play in the woods. I thought nothing of it, until I got home. I picked up my wife from the store on the way back to the house. The porch lights were on, which is our family's way of indirectly saying someone's home. Upon entering our house, I called out to Wesley to see if he was in his room. I got no response, so I assumed he was still outside in the woods, even 5 hours after his call. My kid always loved that fort that I built him. Kim began making dinner, and I changed my clothes and went to the spot in the woods where my son and I had constructed his home away from home. It was starting to get dark, so it was a bit difficult to see through the woods. I spotted the light from his treehouse lamp on through the window, and, as a dad should, began silently creeping up the short ladder nailed into the tree to scare the crap out of him. And when I reached the top, I quickly swung the curtain door open and let out a roar in an attempt to scare my poor unsuspecting son. However, after scanning the small room, Wesley wasn't sitting in his beanbag chair as he normally would. In fact, the chair and his entire collection of rocks, bugs, comics, and games were completely gone off the wooden shelves. The only things in the room were the lit Centronella camping light that had been given to him when we built the treehouse, and a single Skechers sneaker lying in the middle of the room. The shoe was facing the doorway. I walked over to pick it up and examined it in the light of the treehouse lamp. Nothing was unusual about it, but it was Wesley's. I peeked out the window, wondering where my son could have run off to with only one shoe. The darkness had started to creep over the entire forest, and it would eventually be very dark in no time. I called out into the twilight several times with no response. He was probably waiting in, hiding to scare me. And it was working. I was terrified already. I left the lamp on and descended the ladder of the treehouse, continuing to scan the dim area for my son. I called and searched for 30 minutes in the dark, getting no response. I was beginning to panic. Sprinting back in the direction of our home, I noticed that the light in his room was on. A wave of calm and relaxation washed over me. He must have snuck back home when I was out here searching for him, little bugger. I opened the back door and entered the kitchen, immediately greeted by my wife, asking about the shoe in my hand and where her little Wesley was. I explained what happened, and she told me that he hadn't come home. Once again beginning to panic, I sprinted down the hallway to his room and flung the door open. The light to the room was off, and the interior was completely bare. Now, I know I saw his light on when I was returning home from the woods. I flipped the light on with my right hand, still clutching his sneaker with my left. The room was completely empty. His bed, dresser, posters, rug, and bookshelf were completely gone. My wife heard my scream and came instantly rushing to my side, and then she screamed too. We didn't scream at anything we saw, but by the complete lack of something that was before us. Wesley and his possessions were nowhere to be seen, besides the shoe that I clutched. Examining it once more in the bare light of his room, a single word had appeared on the sole of his shoe. Only when viewing it in his room. The word didn't appear anywhere else in the house, only his room. The word "don't" was clearly visible in black block letters on its bottom. Kim immediately called the police and reported a theft, kidnapping, missing child, breaking and entering, and everything. I had already grabbed the flashlight and was combing the woods looking for any signs of my missing child. The police arrived and I told them everything that had happened. The police helped us search the woods and surrounding area for hours. We searched for days and then weeks, months. Wesley never returned to our house. Once a week, I would visit his hideout in the woods, which was now overgrown from the months spent untouched, and I left food and water in hopes that he was hiding somewhere in the woods. But the food just sat on the floor, rotting and filling with bugs. Time blended together. We began to gradually lose hope of ever seeing our boy again. An entire year passed, and I continued to make weekly trips to the hideout, just in case he would someday return. August 23rd, Wesley's disappearance anniversary, landed on a Saturday in 2014. I reclined in silent mourning on my love seat while I recalled the events of exactly 1 year ago. As I sat on the couch, my cell phone rang. The caller ID was our home landline. But I looked over to see our clunky phone set in its home on the dock. No one was using it. The time on the clock next to it read 12:33. I frantically answered the phone, hoping to hear something, anything. A dial tone, just like 1 year ago. Today, I brought Wesley's favorite snack, Cheetos, and an Arnold Palmer sweet tea to bring out to his hideout. But and I forgot them on the counter as I sprinted out of the house. It didn't matter. I climbed the ladder of the fort and flung the curtain open. It smelled bad because of the rotten bread that I had left last week, but I would take last week's meal back to the house whenever I left, half expecting to see the bare room as I had every single week following his disappearance. The long burnt-out citronella lamp flared on with my entrance, revealing the object sitting in front of me. Wesley's other shoe, once again facing the door. In stunned astonishment, I scooped up the shoe, examining it for another word. Once again recalling 1 year ago, I sprinted as fast as I could back to the house. The light of his room was mysteriously on. I blazed past Kim in the kitchen and beelined straight to Wesley's room. I paused for a moment outside the door, noticing that no light was visible under it. The same as it was 1 year ago. I opened the door as Kim ran down the hall and followed me. She realized what I had discovered, and together we shared the same mixture of anguish and hope. As I flipped on the light switch, the empty sole of the shoe now displayed another single word. Bother. We looked at each other in silence as the tears streamed down our faces. I placed the shoe next to its partner in the center of the room, reading the phrase, "Don't bother." Each year since, my wife and I have found another piece of Wesley's clothing in the treehouse. The clues only appeared on August 23rd after I received the phantom phone call from our home landline at exactly 12:33. When I received the call in 2015, I had requested the day off from work. I waited with my phone in my hand at the bottom of the ladder of the treehouse. As soon as my expected call rang, answered, and repeated the dial tone, I flung myself up the ladder into the treehouse. And the same scene as before. Curtain open, light on, the object in the middle of the room. This time, Wesley's pants lay on the floor, feet facing the door. Grabbing them and sprinting to his room felt all too familiar. I flipped the light on once again and read the next word on him. Printed this time on the butt of the jeans. This year the word was looking. August 23rd, 2016. It became tradition for me on these days to miss all other obligations. I wanted to figure out this mystery of my son. The time was 12:32 and I sat cross-legged in the empty hideout, waiting as the seconds ticked by until the inevitable phone call. To my surprise, the phone clock ticked to 12:33 and no call arrived. I waited for another minute, then 5, then 10. Giving up, I descended the ladder. Once my feet touched the ground, my phone instantly rang. Home landline, repeat last year, the curtain, lamp, and object. This year was Wesley's shirt. The same striped, long-sleeved t-shirt that I had seen him in. In his bedroom, I read the next word printed across the back. 4. I already dreaded what next year would bring. I knew that the next word would be him. Some sadistic asshole had kidnapped my son and stole all his possessions, and now they were toying with me, throwing in my face the fact that I had completely failed as a father. August 23rd, 2017. I waited outside the hideout for the call once again. I stood on the tiny deck in front of the curtain until I received the call, but it never came. It seemed that nothing would happen until I was completely on the ground, away from the treehouse. I climbed down the ladder, received the call, and returned to the fort. Wesley's underwear. That was a bit messed up, if you ask me, however. Each article of clothing I had retrieved from the fort was completely clean, as if it was washed that day. The underwear was no exception. Returning to his room, my hunch over the next word was completely proven wrong. Me. Placing the underwear next to the rest of the clothing, I read the words in order. Don't bother looking for me. Now it's 2018, and my son's disappearance anniversary, if you can call it that, was 3 days ago. Nothing showed up in the treehouse, no phone calls, no clothing. I checked. Nothing new was added to the puzzle of his disappearance. I checked his room last night to see the 5 pieces of clothing in the room, as I did quite often, but nothing was there. On the 6th anniversary of his disappearance, all the articles disappeared. No one could have taken them. I had boarded up the windows to Wesley's room and locked the door 3 times over. Those clothes were the last mementos that me and Kim had of our little boy, and now they were gone, too. It's been 1 month since I first made my post about Wesley. And quite a few things have happened in that time. I read through your suggestions on my last post. A lot of you are relating my experience to other supernatural occurrences, like the events of Stranger Things and the disappearance of Will Byers. Considering that this is a television show, it's highly unlikely that there is a separate mirror dimension in which he was taken to. That didn't stop the events of the situation from forcing my mind to wonder. No matter how hard I had researched or checked, there was no secret government facility nearby, no powerful portals, no other instance of children disappearing, only my Wesley. Other suggestions seemed concerned about my wife crying on the day Wesley disappeared, and Kim and I have yet to find a reason behind that. She told me that she didn't feel sad. The tears just came. And to this day, we don't know why. Kim and I didn't know what to believe. If we were being fooled with by some psychopath, if there was some sort of poltergeist, or if we had simply lost our minds from the trauma of losing our only child. We began to lose hope that we were ever going to see him again. But when we least expected it, Wesley came home. The 23rd of August was usually when we got another piece of the puzzle of our missing child, but as you have already read, nothing had occurred this year. Instead, we lost these precious pieces. A month of silent thought and despair took over our lives as we prepared to say goodbye to Wesley for good. We figured that this was the end of the line, his kidnapper, or his own way of saying goodbye to us forever. But on September 23rd, 2018, the back door to our house opened, and a silhouette stood in the doorway. This time, the time was 12:33, just like before. I turned my head from the comfort of my love seat in the living room. In response to the sound of the door opening, with my own 2 eyes, I saw the face of my son, who had been missing for 5 years. In absolute stunned silence, my jaw fell to the floor. Tears welled up in my eyes as I rose from my chair and rushed to greet him. Kim noticed as well, because she screamed in pure joy to see Wesley again. The next thing I knew, I was kneeling and hugging my child's real flesh and bone, and at certain times I was scared that my wife and I would crush him under the pressure of our mutual embrace. Seeing his familiar face relieved me from the memories of these past 5 years filled with anguish and devastation. It was really him. He was home. After minutes of hugging and sobbing with joy, we released him and stepped back. I knelt beside him and looked him over to check for injuries, aging, or signs of starvation. It was at that moment that we realized something heartbreakingly insane. 5 years had passed. Yet Wesley had not aged. He was still wearing the same clothes that he disappeared in. The very same garments that I had found in the treehouse and collected all those years before. He was still 12 years old, and his face and body still confirmed this. Kim noticed as well, because I saw her cover her mouth in awe. We exchanged glances of confused horror. Wesley looked at each of our faces and then spoke. "Mom? Dad, what's wrong? I was just out in the woods. I was hanging out in my tree fort." He looked at the clock on the wall. "I've only been outside 15 minutes. Not realizing the gravity of this statement, he chuckled. It was just a small little laugh, but enough to set off a nuclear bomb of emotions inside me and Kim. Excitement turned to sorrow, and Kim turned her back to Wesley and began sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't bring myself to do anything. I knelt there and I stared at his face, his 12-year-old face, and I couldn't understand. I finally brought myself to speak hoarsely and through a broken voice. I asked him questions, so many questions that he didn't even have time to respond in between them. I needed answers. Dad, what's going on? My fort was exactly as I left it last night. I did exactly what you asked. I called your phone when I got home from school. Then I ran out the door to the treehouse. I came back just now to grab a snack. Why are you even home? Shouldn't you be at work at noon on a Friday? I just stared at him. I couldn't think of a coherent response. My wife left our room and I could hear her muffled wailing from down the hall. I brought Wesley into the living room and sat him down on the couch across from me. I shut off the TV that was still playing and dialed my focus completely on him. I needed answers one by one. Wes, do you know what day it is? It's Friday. Can I go back outside now? You're starting to creep me out. He stood up to leave, but I grabbed his arm to prevent him from leaving the room. As far as I was concerned, he is never leaving my sight again. What's the date, Wesley? What day is it? I may have said this with a bit too much intensity because he reeled back slightly when I said it. Jeez, chill out. It's the 23rd. Why do you care? He seemed hurt and perhaps slightly scared. He knew nothing of what happened. I asked him to carefully explain to me what happened today, minute by minute. From what he told me, Wesley had never even experienced disappearing. His story, word for word, was as follows. I got on the bus this morning while you and Mom stood on the porch and waved goodbye to me. I rode the bus 10 minutes to school, sitting next to Daniel, and then I went to class. At noon, the teacher dismissed us. I got back on the bus, I rode back home, I went inside, turned on the porch light like we always do, and then called your phone like you told me to. You didn't answer, so I hung up and I went outside. I came back inside just now because I wanted a snack. Can I go now? I didn't know if I should tell him about anything. How would he take the news that he just missed 5 years of his life? I stood up and I calmly told him to follow me. Together we walked down the dark hallway to his room, noting the light was on from the crack below the door. I hadn't left it on since I had last visited this barren place, and I immediately swung the door open. Everything was as it had been. His bed and posters and shelves and drawers were all replaced in the exact same way that it used to be. Putting two and two together in my head, I frantically beckoned Wes to follow me outside. I sprinted to the treehouse and my son followed, still questioning me on what the hell was going on. I stood at the bottom of the ladder and braced myself for what was to come, even though I knew full well what was inside. Throwing open the curtain, the same phenomena as his bedroom. Everything neatly stacked in their shelves, comics and games and bugs and bottles. My knees grew weak, and I collapsed on the oaken floor. I dropped to my hands and knees and fell silent, trembling. I stared at the floor, feeling nauseous, cursing whoever or whatever had the audacity to play this cruel, twisted joke to me and my wife. Wesley knelt beside me and put his hand on my shoulder. His warm touch had brought me back to the perverse reality in which I was sitting. Dad, please tell me what's going on. I couldn't hide it anymore. I told him to sit in his beanbag and I took a seat in the windowsill next to him. I told him everything, starting with the phone call that fateful August afternoon. I told him about the treehouse and the clothes, about the room, the words, and the years that had gone by. I struggled to get through the story while also fighting back tears. He could tell I wasn't joking by the sheer amount of emotion in my voice. He stared at the ground. I showed him my phone. The phantom calls from home, which I had archived each year I received them. I cursed myself for never taking any pictures of the empty treehouse or his room, but his dead silence showed that he believed me fully. Finally, I showed him the current date, September 23rd, 2018. He shifted his eyes to meet my gaze, those beautiful brown eyes of his, now glazed over with fear and sadness. What happened to me? There was nothing I could say back. I walked over to him, I wrapped him in my arms and held him tight. I had no idea what had happened. Until today, I had suspected that someone had taken him, but now that I had him back in my arms and seeing that he was still 12 years old, with no recollection of the last 5 whole years, I couldn't help considering the possibilities of the supernatural. Commenters on my last post sparked the idea in my brain, but there was nothing I could do to get it out of my head. We sat and we hugged each other for a long time. I felt his back convulsing as he cried, his face buried into the breast of my shirt. I held him as he wept, and the tears began to return to my eyes as well. My eyes drifted to the citronella lamp in the corner of the room that mysteriously turned on each year. Or at least, where it used to be. It was gone. Everything else in the treehouse returned, but the lamp was gone. I nudged Wesley, and I pointed to the corner of the room. He slowly lifted his head from my chest, sniffling and wiping his eyes. I told him about the lamp during my story, of course, so he noticed that it was gone too. I stood up from the beanbag chair and examined the place where the lamp once was. There was a ring of dust from where it had been sitting for the past 9 years. A thought popped into my head out of nowhere, and I decided to test my current suspicions. I descended the ladder of the treehouse, and I walked back to the house. Wesley followed me close behind, clutching the crook of my arm, as to never be separated from me again. We both experienced a bit of comfort in the subtle gesture. We walked to his room, where we promptly opened the door and took in the scene. Everything was back to normal. The Star Wars poster above his bed, the blue-green rug on the floor. Everything was there. I unscrewed the light bulb from the single ceiling light. If my suspicions were correct, then Ghost Alliance will have helped us uncover a great piece of the puzzle. The ceiling light didn't fit in a flashlight. The bulb was too big. Wesley looked at me curiously and then remembered the appearing words in the story. We both returned to the treehouse, light bulb in hand. There was nowhere for me to plug the light bulb in. The only light in the fort was the lamp, which was now gone. Of course, I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket and turned on my flashlight app. I held my new light directly to the light bulb so that it shone through it and cast a warped LED shimmer over the inner walls of the treehouse. Wesley screamed, and I took a step back. The walls were covered in ghastly handprints, and the floor was covered in spectral footprints, specifically around the sole window, leading out into the forest outside. Each of these was the same black color that the words were written with on the piece of clothing. I panned the room and I took it all in, ending my search on the shelf where the lamp used to be. There was writing. The same lettering that was written on the closed, black block letters. Wesley saw me staring at it and came over to join me. The words were concise. Welcome home. Hey there, everyone who's listening on YouTube, or those of you who are listening on the podcast. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before you head out for the night, I just wanted to let you know about a couple of things. Without you, the show doesn't take place. So, if you guys would like to support the show, or if you guys would like to get your hands on a couple of cool little things whenever new things come out, check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, and any support that you guys show, I really appreciate. So everyone who's already donated to the Patreon, I really appreciate it. You guys are amazing. I thank you so much for that. If you guys are looking for more Creepypasta Storytime, there's a new video that's uploaded to this channel or uploaded to the podcast every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday now. You can be able to get more from me at facebook.com/MrCreepyPasta or on Twitter at MrCreepyPasta and then the number 0. Thanks so much for listening, kids, and for your support.
And sweet dreams.